Yes, we're recording.
And Leila, is a 10:30 hard stop for you? Is that right? 30?
No, I blocked out an hour, so I have time.
Oh, great.
Oh, super great.
Is it because of all the questions Ron sent?
That may have had something to do with it.
Cool. Well, welcome in. Thank you for joining us on our first virtual. All our other ones have been in person, so super cool.
Yeah, this is a big deal for us that we're multi-coast and virtual.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So I welcome everyone into The Ripple Effect. My name is Ron Waddell, one of the co-hosts, and I'm here with my lovely co-host,
Thank you, sir.
Marybeth Campbell.
Leila, very nice to meet you. I'm Marybeth Campbell. I'm the CEO of Worcester Community Action Council. You may be familiar with community action programs across the U.S. We're one of 1,000. And I've heard great things about you through Ron. I'm so excited to have this conversation today.
Likewise. Great to meet you and happy to be here.
And joining us today is our friend Leila Saad from Common Impact, CEO. And so I wanted to welcome her in. Before we get started, I'm on an all-water diet. So I'm for 3 days, but it's intentional deal. So you didn't know this, but me and Marybeth and my son had a steak off, in which all three of us had to cook our own steaks.
That's right.
And then kind of test them. So I'm happy that we did that prior to
the all-water.
My all-water fest.
And Ron is in a remarkable high energy mood for somebody who's only drinking water right now. So I'm appreciative of your attempt and your main character of showing up ready to go.
Absolutely.
Even though I would be crawling in here crying.
I feel good. I feel really great. So to our listeners, just want to let you know, full disclosure, I met Leila through Lucy Dara. And our organization, Legendary Legacies, had the privilege of working with Common Impact and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts. They were our corporate partner. Common Impact kind of facilitated that relationship, and they helped us tremendously. And then I got to meet Leila because there was a community conversation that Common Impact has in regards to creating healthy communities. I think I got that right. And it was on a panel or kind of a fireside chat more with Leila, Lucy, my friend Isaiah Tucker of Inner Voice Outer Change. And we were just talking about corporate volunteerism and skill-based volunteering. So I was super impressed too as I looked at Leila's resume, and being a part of that was like, I think I emailed you like right after the call. It was like, hey, Leila, will you be on our podcast? So super great to bring you in and talk about corporate volunteering. So I'll start with that for some of our listeners that may not even be familiar with, because they think of volunteering in certain concepts. What is Common Impact? What is skills-based volunteering, and how does it work? If you can kind of give an overview.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, to be a part of this. And glad that you're here with the typical energy that you always bring, Ron. I would expect nothing less, even under the circumstances. So this is really cool, and I'm just excited to be here. So yeah, Common Impact is an organization that's been around for about 20 years. And what we do is we create programs for companies where they engage their employees in what we call skills-based volunteering, which is really volunteering where you're not going to a school and painting the school or helping out at a food pantry, but doing something different, which is using your own professional skills, whatever they may be, in finance and marketing and human resources, and giving those skills and your time and expertise to nonprofits who need help with their own internal functioning so that they can function at top capacity and use their time to give back to their communities and ensure that their mission is as effective as can be. So it's a real win-win-win approach. The employees who are volunteering love it because it's super rewarding. The companies love it because their employees then really appreciate the companies giving them the time to do that. And then the nonprofits love it because they get a lot of real value, tangible, real dollar value in a way that they might not otherwise get from the corporate volunteers who are helping them.
Thank you for that overview. From a high level, I was going to ask you this. Oftentimes, companies may start a volunteer program because I'm talking corporations at this point. They may start a volunteer program because the company leadership saw a cool video, saw something, they're like, hey, we want to get into volunteering. So in your role at Common Impact, how do you align those missions and really kind of vet, I guess, your corporate partners in working with the nonprofit community partners? How do you kind of identify who are good fits?
I mean, I think we're lucky in that we're doing this in a time period where there's so much interest in corporate social responsibility on the part of companies. And when it comes to workers, the employees around the world, so many people want to have something meaningful and rewarding in their lives. And especially when you work at a company where it's all about the bottom line and you feel sometimes pressured in your roles, it's just such a relief to be able to have the time to give back and to do something that feels more meaningful. So I guess what I'm saying is it's not hard to find good corporate partners. There's a lot of people out there who really want to do good and don't always have a way to funnel that energy. So, most companies set up sort of corporate or social impact pillars. And what we've seen recently is that many of those are aligned around things that you would imagine they are, like things that are important in this moment, in this, sort of day that we're in. So we've seen a lot of companies have racial justice pillars that are really important, especially post George Floyd's murder. We see a lot of companies doing like sustainability and climate change type of pillars, corporate social impact pillars. And then there's often sort of more general ones that we would think of as having been around for a long time, like supporting homelessness or, food insecurity, things like that. Youth and teen and professional development is another big one that we see. So because Common Impact works with so many kinds of different corporate employees and so many kinds of different nonprofits, we have a really open field for engaging companies. And then the key piece that we add to it as a sort of like intermediary and facilitator is we say, okay, you have these interests. These are your corporate pillars. We work with these nonprofits who really need support and would benefit from your support. Now we make that connection and we figure out how they can align, what the project is going to look like, how we can ensure its success, and how it will ultimately benefit the mission of the nonprofit that we're working with.
Thank you, Leila. This is a really good description of the work that you do, and I think probably in many ways unparalleled in terms of the type of skilled volunteerism you're doing. We work, I don't want to disparage local volunteerism. We work are well funded in good partnership with, for example, our United Ways, but they tend to do more of the painting than what you're describing. And strong funders. Just want to make a quick note of that.
Absolutely. Shout out Tim Garvin.
Yeah. But I think, Ron and I talk a lot about on this podcast of nonprofits also being businesses, right? So we're businesses that we just have a different tax code. And there's inequity and disparity in the comparison of sectors. It's kind of hierarchical, and somehow we're another sector that's sort of perceived maybe as, I feel like we get pat on the head a lot. And from our corporate sponsors, funders, and just the general perception, and I'm speaking in generality a little bit to the point. But in the work of Common Impact, I think it's so helpful to be able to have an expert come in and say, have you considered this? Have you thought about that? Or we can offer our skill set here. It's time bound often. It sometimes requires the nonprofit to think of a project that takes even more time. And I think one of the challenges we face as nonprofits is because we're not necessarily viewed in parity with business as we perceive ourselves as a business, is we have to get that help as a volunteerism rather than making the case that the admin costs ought to be on par to help drive the programmatic input, right? So how does Common Impact look at making sure that the work isn't perpetuating the systemic issues that nonprofits face that just perpetuate that inequity?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good question. And I just say, this is like the key philosophy that powers Common Impact's work, right? We believe, and statistics show that nonprofits spend as little as 2 to 3, up to maybe 5% of their budget on their internal operations, on their core operating expenses. And by contrast, companies typically spend 20%. So we think that's untenable. And we believe that nonprofits need to take care of their staff, compensation, their human resources, their finances, all of these things that are so important to running a business. And we, like you, think that nonprofits are businesses, but with a nonprofit motive and a nonprofit mission. But we want them to run well and run as well as possible. So that's like the philosophy that motivates us. But to get to the second part of the question you were raising, we think we're part of that system, and it can feel a little contradictory. So, I want to recognize that, but we think of ourselves as part of the system of people and nonprofits and advocates who want to promote this idea that nonprofits should be better supported with general operating support, with infrastructure, with unrestricted grants, and with the support of, in our case, corporate partners who can help in the meantime kind of bridge that gap, and in the meantime who can play a role in building internal operations and infrastructure. While at the same time, we want to promote and advocate that that's an ideal state that we want to get to. We're just not quite there yet.
Yep. Are those the types of conversation? Oh, Marrio, the producer right here, always coming in, doing a little troubleshooting.
Hello.
Couldn't do it without him.
Yeah, this would not happen without him here.
Honestly, I don't even know how to control my own mouse. So, are those conversations, Leila, that you're having with, I won't name some of your very large corporate partners, but that are both in some ways perpetuating the inequities on the economic side of things while also doing a considerable amount of corporate giving too. And then you add this third layer of volunteerism. Are you at the point where you're having those types of conversations with corporate partners that what they could be doing and learning about nonprofits could actually shift that dynamic?
I mean, to our surprise and delight, many of the people who are our contacts on the corporate side are very open to this logic, right? Like it really makes sense to them. They often come from the nonprofit field themselves. It's not an uncommon career trajectory for somebody who's sitting in a CSR space at a company to have come from the nonprofit background. So they often really get this, and it's less of a sell. Like I don't feel like I'm coming in with a hard sell when we talk about these kind of things. Ron, I think Lucy Dara is a perfect example of that. She is a corporate social responsibility role. She has a corporate social responsibility role at Blue Cross Blue Shield, Massachusetts. And she really gets this. She understands why it's important. And one thing that's really interesting about those conversations, where it often leads, because we're all constricted in various ways, is that the one thing that companies do feel that they can do now is in the relationships that they're having in their skills-based volunteering programs with nonprofits is to really open up the space to the nonprofit and go to them and say, what can we do for you? Not the sort of old view of volunteering, which is like, we're here to help and we just want to feel good about this. And then it's a big burden on the nonprofit to figure out ways for the volunteer to help. So we really try to cultivate that spirit and facilitate programs that really bring that. That's at the priority and at the front of the conversation.
That's one of the things that was super helpful in our relationship at Legendary when we worked with Common Impact and Blue Cross Blue Shield, was the project we worked on was around data collection. And so as a grassroots nonprofit, when we first started working with Common Impact and Blue Cross Blue Shield, at that point, I don't even think we had the larger grant that we had first gotten. So we had a very small operating budget, maybe $200,000, $300,000. And so in order to be able to get additional funding, to be able to produce the data that these other funders might need or donors might look for to say that the work we're doing is having impact. There's a joke there somewhere with Common Impact and impact, but I'm gonna leave it alone for now. But to look at the work that we were doing, my question is like, how does Common Impact help facilitate that dialogue with the nonprofit partner about, hey, this is the best so last week our last episode, we had Eric Estevez, the executive director of Boston Main Streets, and he made a really poignant point. He was like, sometimes a suggestion can sound like a command because of the power dynamics. And so like, how might common impact and you share where you navigate that conversation, because nonprofit comes and says, hey, we want to do this. And you'd be like, well, listen, there may be another project that could be more even impactful, but not wanting to make that suggestion to kind of get into that power dynamics.
Yeah, this is something we talk about all the time internally. It's really important to us. And it's the great thing about being at a nonprofit, you guys know, is working with people who really prioritize this and really care about it personally and are committed to figuring out the best ways to do these things. So, I really take a lot of inspiration from my team, who will push even me if I say, hey, look at this great company we should work with. They're like, wait a minute. Like, what are we really trying to achieve here? How do we make sure the nonprofit imperative is at the front of the conversation? So what we do is we really tightly facilitate the whole engagement. And that's the role that we think that we have some expertise in playing. So what does that mean? That means that when a company expresses, oh, we're interested in, like I said, racial justice or sustainability or whatever it might be, we then say, okay, let's think about the specific expertise that you have on your team. Right. So we start from there. These programs are often related to the company's business goals. I just want to put that out there. Like, we're not afraid and we don't like hide that. This is part of it. Part of it is to help them achieve what they need to achieve while getting the best resources that we can from them. But when we prioritize that and we're sort of open and honest, like, this is a piece of it. So you want to engage your leaders maybe, or you want to engage your finance team, or you want to engage an HR team. Well, then we say, okay, so what are the kinds of projects that have been successful with such and such size nonprofits who are located in such and such region, who have such and such needs? So we've kind of put together a puzzle of things that typically fit well. And then we go to a nonprofit who's in that space, who's in the field that is related to the social impact goals of the company. And then we facilitate the whole thing really tightly. So we say, okay, we ask them first, like, what are your needs? What are your interests? And then if it's aligned with the expertise of the corporate volunteers who we're going to work with, then it starts to become an exchange. It's not just a, hey, let's do this, or hey, they want to do that. What do you want to do? Okay, boom, let's done. It's more of a conversation, and there's an exchange between us where we have some nonprofit capacity building expertise on our team, and the nonprofit organization and their needs. And we try to encourage them to be very open and honest with us, and to be a thought partner in figuring out what those projects are where they can really get help that's going to be meaningful to them.
Are those conversations that you're having transferable even into the philanthropic sector too? Because that's where I think we face a lot of some of the uphill conversation around the dynamics we talked about earlier. Is and there is a shifting landscape within philanthropy, but maybe not at the pace we need it to be at. Is there a similar type of sort of triangulation of that within the philanthropic sector?
I think that's probably true. It's not a role that Common Impact necessarily plays in its day-to-day work, but I think as sort of a thought leader in this space, I know I personally very much believe in that. And I've been in the nonprofit sector for 20 years before this, and have felt the pains of being funded by foundations and the changing, priorities of the philanthropic sector. So I believe that we are, like, Common Impact plays a small role in promoting the message and the importance of unrestricted grant funding, support for nonprofits, operating expenses. All these things that sort of, to me, are like all pieces of a puzzle that fit together to support the nonprofit sector.
My question was also following up on that, was thinking about partners like us and others. Like, where does Common Impact market itself? Like, how do you guys start to find new partners, new nonprofits? I mean, the corporate sector they're reaching out, they're identifying opportunities like Common Impact and others. But for the nonprofit, like, I had no idea that Common Impact was a thing. I was so grateful to have it fall in our lap. But, like, how do you market to those smaller grassroots nonprofits that are in the nitty-gritty, in the day-to-day, that don't have time to go and look and find resources like you guys?
So this is actually one of the things we also talk a lot about internally, and are really beginning to put an emphasis on as an organization. So we have a sort of network of nonprofits who we've worked with in the past, and who often come back to us and say, hey, I have another project I'd like to work on. Is there a place for us to do it? What we want to do now is be much more intentional about sharing and marketing and communicating out what services we have so that nonprofits can become more familiar with who we are, what we do. And this is going to be reflected in things even like a website refresh that we're going to create, where a nonprofit can come to our website and immediately click on a link and get an appointment with somebody on our team to just get to know us and understand what kind of work we do and how they can become involved. So that's actually a little bit new for us. It's been a little ad hoc and put together, on a one-off basis, but we're really interested in making it more of a system.
Leila, did I understand you to say that you're offering website glow-ups? Because if that's the case, I'm plugging in.
You have a good website.
I don't know what we're offering quite yet, but we'll see. We'll see how it all turns out.
Talking about impact and even the work we did, I was thinking about common impact as well. And how do you guys actually measure your impact in the philanthropic world as you talk about being in this constellation of funders, donors, nonprofits, right? And it's a skill-based volunteering. So is it, I'm assuming, from employees that are doing the work, but also more broadly within society, how are you guys measuring what your impact is?
Yeah, and we're like every nonprofit trying to figure that out.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I will say this, we've started with the very basics, which I think is a really good place for a nonprofit to start. I think too often we tend to be in the nonprofit sector super idealistic, and we have strong motivations, which I think is great. And I love that. I love that about being in this sector. It's what personally motivates me. But I do think we can sometimes overlook the basic data that just needs to be collected just to lay the groundwork. So at Common Impact, we collect basic data like how many hours have volunteers committed, what is the value of the time of the hours they've committed, and then we aggregate that. So that's number one, we need to have that. And even you guys know, even keeping that information up to date can be a huge task, especially if you don't have a data analyst around who can help you. And, everybody's running in 10 million directions trying to do a lot of things. So we're really trying to hold ourselves accountable to just doing the bare minimum. And then from there, figuring out how we demonstrate the bigger impact. And for us, like so many nonprofits, it's the stories of impact that come from the companies we work with, from the volunteers we work with, and from the nonprofits we work with. But we do have two other ways of measuring things. One is we have these surveys that go out at the end of every engagement to the volunteers as well as to the nonprofits to help us understand the impact of the work we did. And we're having a lot of internal conversations about and want to implement some new and deeper engagements so we really understand the longer term impact of the work we've done, which is important, again, to all of us in the nonprofit sector. And then the last piece that I think is kind of interesting, because our mission is actually to align business and social purpose. And we do that through these programs. So we want to understand the impact on the volunteers themselves and their continued engagement in volunteering and civic engagement and just being part of making society a better place. And I have heard that called transformational volunteering versus transactional volunteering. And that really stuck with me as a way to understand and deepen our understanding of how the work that we do impacts volunteers when they leave. They often day of tell us that was amazing. I want to do more of this. It felt so great. And then we're like, yeah, but are you going to? Which is understandable because we're all busy with our lives. But that's a sort of last impact that we're interested in understanding.
That's a good, I'm reminded of even how our partnership started, and sort of that there was a dynamic in the partnership. I run a very large organization. Ron had just started LL and is growing rapidly. But there was there was actually an employer-employee relationship when we started, but that shifted. But you mentioned social pillars in the business frame, and the motivation to engage employees around volunteerism through that lens. Have you noticed any shift, or is there an intentional decision on the part of the business to engage in the volunteerism to help actually meet the goals, not just of using volunteerism within the company to check the box, this is within some tiered component of this pillar, but actually looking at the nonprofit as a potential long-term partner in delivering on the goals and objectives of that pillar itself, almost like a contracted vendor?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, skills-based volunteering has become increasingly popular, period. I think I read a statistic that said that 50% of companies are doing skills-based volunteering projects of some kind or another. One thing that some companies do is they work with their current nonprofit partners. I think, was that the way, Ron, you built the relationship with Lucy, or did we connect you to Lucy?
No, I had known Lucy, and then they were working as a corporate partner with you guys, and then Lucy pulled us in. But one of the cool things, and I'll let you continue, was that even after that initial work, Blue Cross became a corporate partner of ours, and we did post work from just that common impact work.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's two ways that it can work. Sometimes companies come to us with nonprofit partners they're already working with. And the great thing about that is that they've already built relationships. There often is some kind of funding relationship, not always, but I think there often is. And they want to deepen the relationship and the impact that the company can have for the nonprofit. So those are really special relationships that we just help to continue to facilitate and foster. And then there are companies who don't yet have a cadre of nonprofits whom they work with, or they might want to, for example, start to work in a different region or involve employees who are living in a different part of the country and increasingly around the world. To do volunteering and be engaged in one way or another. And in that case, we then build the partnerships. A piece of our work that we have not invested as much in, but are really interested in doing is what can we do as an organization to help facilitate longer term relationships between the two parties after we've stepped away from our engagement.
I love that idea and that concept and pursuit of that, because I think that's as nonprofit leaders, we're constantly in the world of trying to fight scarcity, or the idea of it. It's like, how do you sustain? How do you scale? And short of hiring 1,000 more people ourselves is like, how do you do that through these types of partnerships? And that in the business sector where there is maybe some more leverage, that there's the greater opportunities to sustain and scale. I love that concept. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry, Leila, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, we have these different models that we work on. So one is what we call like a day of service, which sounds exactly what it sounds like. It's like a day of service, just like in what we call traditional volunteering, where a group of employees go to a food pantry or a school and work for the day. So we do that similarly, but we structure the engagement very closely again, because you need a lot of background work first, right? Like you need to structure the project that the volunteers are going to work on with the nonprofit, and make sure all the background information is shared and people know each other. It's like there's a lot more to it. There's a lot more coordinating to it. But we also have long-term projects that last up to 6 months. And that's where it's like a team of corporate volunteers who work with a nonprofit over a period of 6 months. They maybe meet twice a week or once a week. And it's a longer-term project that they're kind of working away at, and then connecting and meeting and checking in on the deliverable. And then they take time and work away at it and get back together again. So we think those are some of the most impactful projects that we can help facilitate. Companies don't always want to start with those, as you can imagine. It feels much bigger, and they can engage many more people if they do one of these days of service where there's like 20 or 50 or even 100 employees involved working with, 10 or 20 nonprofits, depending on the size. So one thing for us, a challenge for us, is to figure out how to engage companies with more of those longer term, deeper impact programs. And the best way for us so far to do that is usually to first engage them in the days of service, get them involved, allow them to see the impact, allow them to see the benefit of it. And then they move toward a longer term project, which is kind of like all systemic change, right? You have to kind of start small and then build and grow.
The 6-month volunteer program is what we participated in with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And over a course of 6 months, what they did was, because I didn't have the expertise, or no one on the team did, was actually set in on interviews with platforms that would host our database to help vet and ask the questions. There was an IT person, there was a data analyst that worked with us. Shout out to Mitchell. He even ended up sending a corporate donation of his own, a personal donation of his own to the organization from the work. So that speaks to some of the transformational impact that can happen. We were having that conversation as well, even before we jumped on, talking about universities locally, sometimes, or even across the country, that will have a student or they have an initiative to come in. We were talking about how they'll look at and say, hey, this student got X grade, but did it really have impact in the nonprofit or in the community that they were looking to be a part of? And so I love that idea of what you're saying. You're looking at how does it actually transform the individual and go on beyond just that one corporate partnership. As generations shift and we see corporations start to be run by some millennials and Gen Z, from your perspective at Common Impact, in what ways have you adjusted, or are you seeing that you may need to adjust to work with those kind of corporate partners that as the generation shift, we see that on our side, but just curious from your end, like what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, these are our people. We are like inspired by them. We are inspired by them 100%. I think that, I mean, I don't know if I'm imagining this is what you see too, but my own kids are like this. My nieces and nephews are like this. My niece recently graduated from college and is on the interview circuit. And every company that she went to talked about their volunteering programs and their social impact programs. And she and her friends are asking for that. They're like, oh, and before I end this interview, I want to know what you're going to allow me to do with my time here that's going to feel really good and that's going to help me get back. Yeah. So it's like integral now. And I think it's coming from them. I mean, I know some of us old fogies like have been trying to, advance this for a long time now, but I really feel like it's taken off, and it's just, there's a new social imperative that's a part of young people's lives that's so different than the generation that I don't know if it's, I would say different than the generation I grew up in. I think there was a time before my generation in the United States, at least, where volunteering or civic life was like a bigger piece of your life, right? Like you did it in your community. Yeah. And one thing that's cool about what Common Impact is doing is that people are spending so much time at work, right? Yeah. And it is what it is, but you a lot of times you organize your life around work. So I think it makes sense that people are looking for value and giving back and rewarding social engaging experiences through work. But yeah, I guess my answer to my question is that I really look to them for inspiration.
That's an interesting. In helping my direct reports manage a younger generation, in observing sort of that more vertical integration of where purpose lies, that it may not lie as much in, as you just described, sort of that community volunteerism, or it could be, or faith-based maybe as much. I don't want to speak for everybody, but there's been maybe a little departure of that personal and professional purpose are maybe a little more intertwined in this generation. I do think, and my observation is that also brings along with it maybe an unhealthy, disproportionate amount of personal, what's required for empathy, I guess, in terms of being an employer and whether you're in a nonprofit sector or business sector. But what that does for nonprofits in particular, that especially right now, post-COVID, is the weight of the emotion of doing social services and the trauma associated with that. So this is a long-winded question, which is typically how I ask questions, but like, where does mental health come in to or does it come into Common Impact in terms of where there's support on that's operations, but also there's a programmatic element to that too, I think, and not making sure staff is feeling valued, retention, not getting burned out, and the like. Yeah.
Yeah. So I like your long-winded question because it brought up so many different ideas for me. But so I think statistics show, first of all, that volunteering has gone way down in this country. And that's been studied by groups who are engaged in this. For sure, AmeriCorps and others really follow this and do research on it. So that's one thing to say. At the same time, I think corporate engagement in social impact work has gone way up, right? So that makes sense. One thing that there's also research that shows that, and this makes sense for all of us, that volunteering can have a really positive impact on mental health. And I think in this like disconnected world that we live in, especially for young people who like struggled during the pandemic or grew up with phones and sort of like interact socially in this digital way and not in the real world way that I'm definitely used to, feel very disconnected. They get their connections through the digital world. So I think that that's part of the reason that volunteering has always made people feel good, right? It's so life affirming to know that you're helping somebody else. And it helps to build social bonds when you're able to give back and support people and see the benefit of that. So I think for all those reasons, programs like this are a great way actually to address mental health in the workplace, which, as I think you were alluding to, is becoming the responsibility of employers.
Yes. Right. Yeah.
Right. And we're often like really uncertain how to do that because it's not like something we were taught in school or we're expecting to do as leaders of nonprofits or of companies. But now it's becoming an imperative. And I think this is one great way to address that.
That's a good point.
And it's not just a social imperative, it's a nonprofit imperative.
There you go.
That's the subtitle of our byline. It's a subtitle. It's our byline. So I had to throw that in there. You mentioned earlier, and I do want to get your insight questions coming on like some of the challenges because this has sounded so great. But I wanted to get your insight. You mentioned globally. And so I was reading a report or an interview rather with Jerome Daniil of Marriott International. And he talked about the American lens is that the value and the idea is that the mechanisms that have been created for volunteer engagement put a value set around them that are tied to perhaps the way that we as America and Eurocentric Christian lens. And so volunteering not being universally valued or done differently elsewhere. What ways has that impacted kind of the work you're doing at Common Impact in bridging this gap?
It's such a good question. And before I came to Common Impact, I ran a global organization called PillNet, which worked with lawyers and law firms to engage them in legal pro bono for nonprofits around the world. And as you can imagine, this plays out differently in every single country around the world. It's like we say here in the United States, like you can't just go into a rural community and impose your ideas, or you can't just go into a city and impose your ideas. You have to, and thankfully, the world is awakening to this, and we all recognize we cannot just come in with our ideas. And I think the United States has learned this lesson. And it's become, there's like a reckoning, right? Just as we've had other kinds of reckoning, there's a reckonings with colonialism and imperialism and what it means. And I think, once again, young people are learning about this in schools and coming up in a different way with a different understanding about American democracy and exporting our ideals. And I think there's much more sensitivity to this than there has ever been before. Thank goodness, it's so needed. So what that means for us is we are interested in working in other parts of the world. We've started in the UK and Canada. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of similarities in those two jurisdictions. But we have a lot of companies who have offices in India. So they've been coming to us and saying, could you please help us create programs in India? We're like, what do we know, right? Like trying to be like honest about this. So the way we started to look at this is just coming in with total and complete curiosity and humility and understanding that we don't know what we're doing. We have a great service, we have a great program, but if we want to adopt it to a different location, we're not going to be the experts. We need to get experts involved who are going to help us to do this. So just to take India as an example, again, we're forming a relationship right now with an Indian volunteering organization and looking to them to be the experts to help us figure out how would we even do this. And we're trying to be very mindful of, again, the power dynamics there and how we could do this in partnership with them. And again, so it's not us saying, hey, we have this great idea, adapt it, but really being much more intentional and humble about it as we take this, approach.
Part of our goals on the podcast as well is to talk about innovative and creative solutions to solving societal problems. Marybeth's at WCAC as a larger nonprofit partnering with us to help mitigate our cash flow was huge. And so I was going to pitch it back to you, Leila, and say, like, from your perspective, broadly, 50,000 feet up in the air, as you're in this constellation in this area of nonprofit, like what are some emerging trends that you're seeing in addition to the skills-based volunteering? I'm asking you to step outside a little bit of your area of expertise, maybe, but I think hearing your background, you're really tied into all of this. What are some of the innovative ways that you're seeing this happen within? I feel like we're on the cusp of a larger philanthropic wave that's going to crash as we kind of come through this. Like philanthropy in its whole has to be done differently, or have conversations like this, and kind of how historically where COVID catalyze these conversations, but it seems like the dialogues are like, there's got to be a different way to go about doing this. We went and watched the movie Uncharitable, really, really profound, and just thinking about ways to go about that. So broadly, what are some of the ways that you're seeing innovative or creative solutions to solving societal problems in the nonprofit and philanthropic sector?
Yeah, I think you hit on the first one, which is captured in the movie Uncharitable. And by the way, one of our board members was featured in that movie, Dory McWhorter. She was at the YWCA.
Yeah. Oh, she was awesome. Yeah, she was great.
About the impact investing as an approach to revenue generation, which was really interesting. So I've learned a lot from her, as you can imagine. But I think that the whole idea of unrestricted funding is so important. And thanks to the movie and the author and all of the people who've been influenced by it. And this has been a conversation. Again, I've been in the nonprofit sector for 20 years. I mean, we were talking about this way back when, like, this is what we need, this is what we need. And the controversies and scandals around it really kind of ruined our sector for a while, because they took on a life of their own. And that movie did a great job of unpacking that and helping us to understand how so many of them were just overblown. But I think it really skewed the entire country's view of charities and nonprofits in a way that was so unhelpful to our entire sector. So anyway, for me, that's one key change that's happening. And I was the beneficiary at Pillnut of one of those Darren Walker Ford Foundation unrestricted grants that he instituted that really changed the whole psyche. I don't know how else to put it, the psyche of a whole group of nonprofits who just took a big sigh of relief. Or thank you so much for finally making this available to organizations who it's so crucial for them. So I think that's probably, one of the biggest ones. I think the other two that I would point to is, one, there's this new emphasis on systemic change, which I think many of us who were in nonprofits have always felt is the most important thing, but it's becoming more recognized and we talk about it more easily. It's becoming language that's recognized in all sectors of society. And I think that's going to have an impact on the way nonprofits do their work. And then the third one I would say is the human-based approach, right? That we're all sort of trying to put humanity first in our own lives and our work-life balance and the way we treat each other. And I think that's going to have an impact on the way nonprofits work over the long term.
As we're kind of approaching our landing zone on this episode, I just want to make sure I say this to you, that this is the first time you and I have ever met. I've done some research on Common Impact and you as an individual, but I just appreciate you have such a centered through line. You're so consistent, and that just seems to come through in your work too, which I just think we need more leaders like you that really embrace and understand both from cultural proficiency to just understanding the power dynamics. It's just really refreshing to hear how consistent in that through line that you have. So I just want to thank you and appreciate that, acknowledge my appreciation for that. This is a complete departure question from me just saying that, but in talking a lot about, the business side of the relationship and businesses having sort of this concept of where they want to direct their social pillar type of work, what would you recommend to nonprofits in terms of just readying for skills-based volunteerism? What are the things that are what's their role in getting the biggest bang for their buck out of it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that we think is really important for us to help nonprofits to understand. So the first one is, sort of tasking the right people in the organization with this. So people who have the capacity and the time and can invest in it. And we try to, as a facilitator, ask as little as possible of the nonprofits that we work with, because we're very mindful of their time and their resources. But having somebody who's an advocate or excited about a project like this can make all the difference. At the same time, you need some leadership buy-in. So I'd say that's a second point that's important. And then an internal assessment that you have the capacity to take this on is super important. And we always tell nonprofits, no pressure, you don't need to do this. We can come back later. We want to make sure that you have the capacity to take this on. Again, we're constantly trying to make it as light a lift as possible, but there is going to be some input that we need from the nonprofit, of course. And then the key one is defining the project and scope well. And we play a big role in helping nonprofits to do this because we recognize that they might have grand ideas or maybe be thinking too small even. Sometimes that happens with us. So we want to right size the project and scope and make sure it's the kind of project that corporate employees would be able to help with. And then the last one really is just very clear communication with us and with the team, the corporate volunteer team they're working with, including if challenges arise, if things aren't going well, but even at the very outset, like really communicating who you are, what's important to you as a nonprofit, what your mission is, why it's vital, and why it's vital for the people you're serving. Because honestly, that's the thing that motivates the volunteers to do their best work too. When they know like how important your work is, they then get excited and involved and become like a true partner to you and really go the extra mile to make sure that what they produce for you is going to be super valuable.
Yeah.
That's one of that piece, that last piece, all of them were great, but that last piece to me is critical feedback, especially for me and smaller nonprofits, because I know when I jumped into the space, it was like, I don't want to tell them what they're doing is not on point. Again, because of the power dynamics, like in some ways, just happy to be here. I don't want to upset the apple cart, but to your earlier points about how you have selected and how you go about finding the corporate partners, that was not such a issue for me with the team that we had from Blue Cross Blue Shield. Shout out to the team there. Obviously, Lucy helped pull that together. But that team, they made it really comfortable to have that. But I also think it's important to hear, for our listeners to hear from you, Leila, like that you can do that. I think there's sometimes this understanding, especially within BIPOC-led nonprofits, as we deal with the white supremacist patriarchal structure. Like, I don't want to challenge that or go against that. And so this idea of like, you can, within a organization itself, we call it managing up. That's a whole other thing. But being able to speak up through the chain vertically and say, hey, this isn't working. And then finding out that, hey, the feedback is super helpful because now we know we can tweak or adjust what we're doing. And so helping gain that confidence. Again, I'm going to pivot off of that question. I want to give you a chance to share, and this is probably maybe like picking your favorite something or other, but I wanted you to share what was one of the projects that really amplified Common Impact and really was a great partnership that really promoted, one that resonates with you in your time there that just comes to mind quickly about the impact and what you were able to do between a corporate partner and a nonprofit partner.
There are so many, but one that I'm really proud of this week is a relationship that we have had ongoing since 2018 with the Knowledge House. It's an organization based in the Bronx that supports underserved young people to access high-wage tech careers. And they started out with an amazing founder, Geraldine Rodriguez, super inspiring person. And when we met them, they had about 14 people on their staff. We worked with them on 3 or 4 projects, and they were all around. So let me give you an example of what they were. One of them was on like a competitive research analysis for them to understand who they are in the space and how they compare to other organizations. We did an expansion market analysis to help them figure out how they would grow. And then we did an earned revenue strategy project, which is so important for nonprofits and not always something that we have the time to think of when we're so busy doing our day-to-day service. And we did those with JP Morgan Chase, Macquarie, and there might have been another corporate partner. Needless to say, this organization has grown, and it's not, of course, because of us. I mean, they have an amazing founder, but it's about 50 people now, and they just announced that they received a $5 million unrestricted grant from Mackenzie Scott last week.
Wow.
So It's just, we're so proud in so many ways.
That's a great story. That's. I think I might have seen that on LinkedIn actually.
Did you?
That's ringing a bell now that although there's been a few of those announcements
Yeah, Mackenzie's been
busy.
She's been busy.
Mackenzie, if you're listening,
money. Yeah, Mackenzie, if you tapped in, you want to come on or donate.
She's a North Star guest, I think, for us at some point. But yeah. I have one more question. Just in doing research around you, Leila, in Common Impact, I noticed that one of your sort of core pillars and values is around levity, and levity in your workplace. How do you do that? What do you do? We're big fans of dad jokes, but how do you bring levity to your work?
There's a whole group of us who like dad jokes too, including my husband, who himself is a dad. But I think it's, again, I look to the, earlier career people on our team. We're almost all on Zoom now, which is a little sad in its own way, because we're all around the country. We're mostly in New York, but we have some people in Chicago and the West Coast and elsewhere. But our team is very agile with all the various platforms that are being used these days. And that's one of the places that they express their humor more than anything. So every staff meeting, there's just a flow in the chat of jokes and silly gifs and people saying funny things and like riffing off of one another. And half the time, I'm like one of the older people on the team. I'm like trying to keep up, but it's hilarious. And then everybody jumps in and responds, and it's made the work, the work day better and more pleasant. And I think just letting people be themselves and, sort of encouraging that kind of team camaraderie has been actually something that I've learned from them, really. And it's been a lot of fun.
So do you have a dad joke? Do you have your favorite dad joke? Do you have one on hand?
And 1 sec. He's the expert. I'm the one who's usually rolling my eyes like, no.
Well, listen. I'll ask you. Did you know? No, seriously. There was a guy. He was focused on like climate and all that. So he stayed up all night to see where the sun goes. Did you hear about him?
No.
Well, it took him a while, but then it dawned on him.
There it is. But
yeah,
we're here every week. Try the veal.
I'm here all week. Leila, it's so great to have you be with us, join us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so insightful. And I echo all Marybeth's comments as well. I think what you shared is going to be super helpful and insightful to our listeners, and really grateful for you to come on. Before we sign off, just want to give you, was there any last words that you want to share, any sage advice for listeners that are corporate sponsors, philanthropy and nonprofits? Any sage advice that you'd love to give?
I mean, I just want to say thank you so much for saying what you did, Marybeth and Ron. I mean, I've had many professors. That's the only way that I have this point of view about the world. And if I have any sage advice, it's that, like, look to learn all the time. There's so much that's changing. And I think we can drown in it, right? We can feel like so disempowered sometimes, like I can't keep up. But I love learning. I love learning about new ways of thinking and learning from new people, meeting new people. And that's the only way I've developed my own sense of self and my own views about how we can make a difference in the world, is just to looking to all the many professors in my life, including people like you. So thank you for having me be a part of this.
It's been awesome.
Absolutely.
Great conversation.
Thank you so much, Leila, for joining us. This is The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative. We thank you for joining us. Make sure you like, subscribe, follow. We'll put some of these links in the comments on the page that you can follow. Continue to look up Common Impact and figure out how you can part with them and other folks that we mentioned. But we appreciate you, Leila, and all of our listeners, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.
Great to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
I know Leila. I just echoed that. I don't know why. It's like that new commercial.
Bye.
See ya.
You're listening to The Ripple Effect, a nonprofit imperative with Ron Waddell and Marybeth Campbell. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We'll see you on the next one.